Welcome to today's session, delivering on net zero, the role of the in-house lawyer. I'm Sarah Dobson, the Executive Director of Acela, the legal network for social impact, a global community of lawyers who are working to create a sustainable economy that promotes positive social and environmental impact. Today's session is in partnership with Lawyers for Net Zero, an organisation supporting in-house lawyers on their net zero journey. And the event takes place as part of London Climate Action Week, which this year takes a look at the global response to climate. It seems like much more than a year has passed since last June's London Climate Action Week, where Acela explored what lawyers and particularly law firms were doing to address the climate emergency, and looked at how the Chancery Lane project were engaging lawyers in collaborative drafting of model clauses for use in precedents and commercial agreements. Since then, particularly in the context of this year's Climate Week and in the run-up to the UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, there has been a growing wave of initiatives and engagement across the legal profession. The Chancery Lane project now has 71 clauses freely available for lawyers to use and is working on their net zero toolkit for publication in advance of COP26, for example. Major law firms have also woken up to sustainability, ESG, and to net zero. If you want to find out more about how law firms are engaging with this, we invite you to attend the launch tomorrow at 12 noon UK of the UN Race to Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, which is a launch event for something focused on private practice. And I'll share the link to that in due course in the chat. As you can see from the increase, particularly in legal events this Climate Week, last year from memory there were around 3, and this year I think there are 14 or 15 events. The legal community is in learning and action mode. Within this wider context, an essential part of the conversation is around the role of the in-house lawyer, thus our event today. As part of their position, General Counsel are tackling wider social and environmental questions within their organisations, with ever greater scrutiny of supplier practices, and as you'll hear from our speakers today, often also a personal drive to contribute meaningfully to net zero. In-house lawyers are using their position to support and to bring about their company's transition. Later today, you'll hear from counsel who are working together on this topic in 2 panels moderated by Adam Woodhull, Executive Director of Lawyers for Net Zero. All that remains for me to tell you is a little about the format of our session today. I'm delighted to be joined here by our speakers, who you will meet soon. And I want to highlight that today we have an agenda with 4 items on it. We have 2 keynote sessions, followed by 2 panels. Throughout the session, I invite you to use the question and answer function to submit your questions for the speakers, and we'll have a period of Q&A at the end. The chat function is also available to you to type any comments or share relevant links. So I would now like to introduce you to our first keynote speaker. Paul Clements Hunt will shortly be sharing his thoughts on how net zero fits with the wider picture of ESG. Paul is the founder and CEO of the Blended Capital Group, an investment advisory company he established after leaving the United Nations in 2012. From 2000 to 2012, Paul was the head of the UNEP Finance Initiative and a founding board member of the UN Principles for Responsible Investment. Based in Nairobi, Paul continues to advise the UN, including as an investment advisor on the UNDP Joint Sustainable Development Goal Fund. And being a non-lawyer, he's used to thinking deeply about the role of lawyers in addressing environmental and social needs, as one of the co-authors of Chasing the Dragon, the rise of the ESG law firm, which is a global report looking at how law firms can contribute to the delivery of the Sustainable Development Goals. So Paul, over to you, and thank you for joining us.
Sarah, greatly appreciate that. Thanks to yourself at Essler and Adam at Lawyers for Net Zero. And as I said on the prep, this is the first tie I've had on in since February of 2020 to honor your launch. So look, in 10 minutes, all I can really do is tell a story, frame a picture, weave a web, capturing the challenges and the massive opportunities that Lawyers for Net Zero have, and the general counsels backing it, and what you face in the coming decade and beyond. And I'm not going to talk about Shell. I'm not going to talk about Engine One. I'm not going to talk about Exxon. I'm going to take you a little bit through a personal voyage in terms of my 30-year interface in sustainability, climate change, and trying to mobilize capital markets towards that. And I'm going to come at it from initially 100,000 feet. And also at the same time, I'm going to simply, in a Formula One style, just capture some moments from my own career, which I think are relevant and context setting, and importantly, give signals and signposts for the challenges that Lawyers for Net Zero and general counsels have in coming years. So you'll forgive me for starting on my own journey, but here we go. Look, so snapshots in terms of how we got here, how we got to COP26, how we got to ESG, how we got to $120 trillion supposedly backing the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment. So I go back to Madrid, 1991. I'm a journalist. I'm sitting in a sealed telephone booth, reporting and filing copy on the imminent failure and collapse of the Antarctic environmental protection regime. In one of those golden journalistic moments, a hole in my telephone booth let me hear what the head of the US delegation was saying. He was pleading with John Sununu, the then head of the first President Bush's White House, to sign the Antarctic environmental protection regime. And not leave the US as one of only 39 nations who would become the dirty man of Antarctica. Sununu won, they didn't sign it, the Antarctic environmental protection regime collapsed. The energy lobbyists won on that occasion, not a question. Let's move on. That's one example. Fast forward to Buenos Aires, UNFCCC COP4. I'm a survivor of 14 COPs, including Paris. But way back in '98, we kicked off something called the International Emissions Trading Association. My key question at launch, no one from finance is in the room. There are no bankers, there's no financiers, nobody is in the room. Only a couple of loan insurers. Why were we there? Why? Why was no one there from the finance sector? Again, another snapshot moving forward quickly. UNHQ, New York, in the atmospheric ECOSOC chamber, that's Economic and Social Chamber, with Professor Paul Watchman of then Freshfields, Brookhouse and Derringer, when he launched a 150-page legal interpretation of ESG and fiduciary law in the 9 major capital market jurisdictions. A long, slow burn, but in terms of the volume of funds and the focus on ESG, 15 years on, we're seeing ESG easily mainstreamed. And the legal fraternity, not all of them, but in the last 5 years, beginning to take ESG seriously. I think in some ways because of the upsurge in terms of investment flows, but also a range of other factors. So that was 2005. New York Stock Exchange, April of 2006. So I'm on the iconic balcony of the exchange with Kofi Annan opening the US markets. On that day, at the bell ringing ceremony, we had on the balcony, we had 53 institutions or representatives thereof, and $4 trillion in capital backing ESG and Annan's principles for responsible investment, the PRI as it's now commonly known. By 2021, that figures up to 120 trillion and 4,500 institutions. Is everything solved in terms of environment and sustainability because of that? No, we'll come back to that. Fast forward again, it's a personal sort of journey I'm giving you, but in terms of an understanding that I think Lawyers for Net Zero need in the challenges ahead. 2015, Paris, Cities Day, at UNFCCC COP21, just a few days ahead of the Paris Agreement, in fact, 4 days ahead. So it was a tough gig. I was launching the UN Secretary General's Cities Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, but I was squeezed between two political rock stars, the then governor of California, Jerry Brown, and his immediate predecessor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. They got all the camera flashes and questions. So what's my key point here? In the business of climate, in the politics of climate, in the policy and the regulatory affairs of climate, there are no easy wins. We are talking about a transition where there's huge embedded 250-year-old invested interests to what needs to be a completely different approach. We're using the term energy transition and the transition to sustainability. Again, there are no easy wins. I think for Lawyers for Net Zero, your first challenge out of the gate, Adam and the general counsels here, is to protect and build the momentum around net zero. It's no news to any general counsel that we have a current ESG bubble, a tsunami of greenwash and uncertainty over carbon markets. And the gap between sovereign and corporate climate pledges and impact, that net zero itself is already under a forensic microscope. As Lawyers for Net Zero, you already have a political policy and technical battle on your hands on this, your launch day. So for the initiatives to gain traction, have global impact and change the climate debate while accelerating the sustainability and energy transition, you have huge obstacles, and yet the wind is filling your sails for those businesses who are early movers on real net zero. Why? For several reasons. Let's start with the future clients for all of your brands, whether consumers, business, or industrial. Anyone born in 2000 already has faced two distinct systemic failures, with the mother of all systemic failures evolving behind that. So now, in their 21st year, someone born in 2000, they've already experienced at the age of 7 or 8 the global financial crisis. More than likely, they were unaware of the impact of the crash on their economic prospects. But today, many have some feeling for that. In their 21st year, the current COVID-19 pandemic unfolds with close to 4 million global deaths and accompanied by social and economic mayhem. I don't need to go into any details, we're living it. The backdrop to all of this is the uncertain and unpredictable volatility of global warming, impacts and ecosystems collapse, the mother of all systemic failures, as I call it. In 1954, the Canadian economist J.K. Galbraith wrote in his foreword when commenting on the causes and impacts of the financial crash, ordinary people know when they have been rimmed. He used the word rimmed. Galbraith was also known for his fruity, if not lewd use of language in private correspondence, but he got his point across. Back to our 21-year-olds. In this decade, as they grow towards their 30s, whether as members of Extinction Rebellion or the local tennis club or both, every indicator tells us that societal trust in many institutions, including big business, has been defenestrated. Whether climate, ecosystems, destruction, diversity, human rights, issues in the supply chain, social injustice, no large branded global business can afford to do anything but be authentic. By the decade's end, sooner perhaps, I think authenticity will trump accountability and transparency as the aspirant go-to for corporate DNA. Can you and how do you embed authenticity in corporate culture? I believe this is a key role for General Counsel, and by stepping up to join Lawyers for Net Zero, it's a significant step. If you own it, if net zero is real, if you help define it. Moving on, for some, net zero is already not enough, however. The clamor for corporate leaders to pledge regenerative climate action, going beyond net zero and paying back legacy carbon debts will grow. Climate will increasingly become the lightning rod to channel political pressure on G7, G20 and OECD governments and the business who see those businesses who see the developed economies as home. From the current 46.5 degree heat dome stretching from California to the Pacific Northwest, to the year in, year out fires in California, Australia, Greece, Portugal and beyond, to species destruction, speeding fractures of the Western Antarctic ice shelf, the heat will be on our political elite to go beyond net zero. Will they yield? If Lawyers for Net Zero establish a cohesive, comprehensive and defining definition of net zero, which informs political debate, This will act to establish center ground for what is possible in the transition and protect companies from more hysterical claims and attacks. A challenge to the initiative as you launch: could you, in 5 years' time, support net zero plus, or even net zero plus plus, to align with businesses who wish to go beyond straightforward net zero pledges and approach regenerative climate action? We're thinking about Adam and Sarah and the GCs on the panels and listening. Finally, in terms of factors working for your initiative, my experience in those 14 COPs and over the last 30 years tells me that to truly swing big changes at UNFCCC COPs, only the largest governments with effective machinery and global reach can succeed. Denmark failed at the much heralded COP15 in 2009 before it collapsed on the last night of negotiation, while Laurent Fabius and the French succeeded in Paris at COP21. So the fact we have a major political beast in the UK convening COP26 in November means that there will be political energy that lawyers for net zero can use. The French worked their diplomatic machinery for a full 2 years before COP21 and for a year afterwards to ensure a result and to maintain traction. The UK is coming off the back of a fractured global geopolitics, but I'd wager the world desperately needs a collective success at something, and the Glasgow Climate Summit could be it. So let me close my opening comments with a couple of points. I was looking for a metaphor last night for the role of general councils across different sectors in climate change. And the metaphor came through a book I'm reading, The Last Grain Race. It's from 1938. It's by Eric Newby. And he sailed around the Horn to Australia and back on a four-rigged sailing ship. The general counsel is not the skipper. You're the first mate. As part of the chapter, he describes a storm in the Southern Oceans, unbelievable ferocity at every level, and they survived it. The general counsel's role I see going forward is the storm is not just one of climate change, it is all the mixed systemic issues around ESG. It's the functioning and questioning of corporate behavior and the behavior of our governments. General counsel, as the first mate, in difficult storms that will come and go, they'll be becalmed. Its role in terms of climate change is to grasp it, is to own it, is to drive it through the DNA of corporate culture. I think general counsel sits in that both privileged and pressing position of being a light rod for the volatility we will see in politics, policy, and regulatory issues in and around climate change. Final closing thought is that net zero enough? In terms of taking that step and framing the corporate thinking and culture and thinking about it and genuinely delivering authentically on net zero, perhaps will also speed companies to the next step in terms of the transition. Sarah, I hope I haven't gone beyond my time. I hope my Formula One semi-scouse delivery was understandable, but let me leave it there. And thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to stay with you. Love the concept. Think you've done incredible work. Kudos to Adam and yourself. And I'm now going to take my tie off, but congratulations on your work.
Thank you, Paul, for those words. And I think, as you've said, the challenge for everyone on the call today is to do more and to understand how can in-house counsel and lawyers more generally fully embed climate considerations throughout their work and the DNA of their organisations. On that note, I will now swiftly hand over to our second keynote speaker, Kieran Kelsey. Kieran joined Ian's legal team in 2007 from private practice, and in her role as general counsel for Eon UK, she leads a team of 27 lawyers who are working towards their shared purpose of leading the energy transition. So thank you, Kieran, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts on the role of the in-house lawyer in net zero. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can you hear me okay? Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I think the theme of my keynote address is probably going to be why bother? Why should I bother? In-house lawyers are always really busy, so why should you make time for this? And in order to get to that, I want to give you a feel of the journey I've been on to get behind net zero, and then why I'm so keen to support lawyers for net zero and why I think they really add value and support you in this piece. So first of all, to kick off with my journey, if you'd asked me about a year ago about net zero, I would have had two answers for you. First one, too big a problem for me as an individual to make a real difference. Too many angles, too many aspects, and I haven't got time to think about it. And secondly, this is for others to work on. And believe me, at E.ON, an energy company which prides itself on providing customer solutions to lead our customers through the energy transition, there are plenty of other colleagues across our organisation working on the topic of net zero. So why bother, and what changed in my own mind? I think there were a couple of factors that linked into this. At the beginning of this year, everyone suddenly started talking about ESG. It's, for some reason, really come to my attention over the course of the beginning of the year. And as part of ESG, people have also been talking a lot about net zero, both internally and externally. Our new group-wide CEO announced that ESG was going to be his focus area and has set up a strategy team specifically to look at this across the group. And about the same time, it coincided with Adam contacting me and approaching me about the concept of lawyers for net zero. And that really got me thinking about how can we, as the in-house legal team, make a difference and make a real difference. And the more I discussed this with others, both internally and externally, I realized that we as internal lawyers can play a much more proactive part in this journey to net zero. And then I started discussing it with my team, and I was amazed how enthusiastic they got about it, about this whole topic, and how quickly they got enthusiastic about it. And it was really easy to get them behind the whole concept of net zero, because realistically, who doesn't want to play their part in saving the planet? And a couple of things, just to give you a couple of ideas for today's session. We set up a mini team of 4 in my team who were going to focus on ESG, but also net zero in particular. And we're currently running a few team-wide half-day sessions to discuss all the concepts of sustainability and net zero. And we have linked in colleagues from our supply chain, from our policy team, but also our external legal advisors as part of this. And the team really got behind these concepts, and just as feedback from the first session we had, we pulled together basically a short, medium and long-term plan of what we as the in-house team could do in order to push forward net zero. And some of the examples range from the quite simple steps and what you might consider to be quite small steps, but sometimes it's good to have some easy wins in the whole mix because it feels like you're making some progress. So some of the small steps we looked at is, let's ideally work with no printing. We sort of got used to this as part of the whole pandemic and having to work from home, but let's not go back to the old ways of printing a whole load of paper that we then end up throwing away very shortly afterwards. We moved to using electronic signing, again, mainly driven through the pandemic, and that really pushed our drive to it. Let's not go back to wet ink signatures if we can avoid it. Those are some of the smaller steps, but we also started thinking in bigger terms around, it made my team realize how important the horizon scanning was for us in this particular area. And I'll come on to mention some of the feedback from the Climate Change Committee that came out last week. But also looking at devising supplier questionnaires, but then linked to that, contract clauses that really bite in the contract and ensure that some of the promises that are made at the start of the tender process then do actually get followed through in the net zero context. So you're probably thinking, well, it's easy for her to get involved. She works for an energy company. They're all fully behind net zero. So what's new and what's different for me. My team's already been working on EV charging contracts, our smart meter rollout, solar facilities for customers. So what's different now than this time last year, for example? I think there's a renewed awareness of the whole net zero piece that I sense both internally and externally. And just to give you a couple of my internal quotes, and I am quite unashamedly stealing them from my colleagues, but our Chief Strategy Officer quoted, "Getting to net zero by 2050 is a once in a lifetime project." So would be nice to be part of a once in a lifetime project. And to quote our UK CEO, "This next decade until 2030 is critical to meet that target by 2050 in homes, businesses and cities." So these are all reasons for why I've decided to bother and really to take action. So now to second part of my address is, so why Lawyers for Net Zero? Why do I think there's an advantage in Lawyers for Net Zero? I think there's a couple of points here. I think the first one is around, I think in my view, in-house lawyers have got a really vital role to play. Net zero, as we all know, is part of ESG. ESG has also got that whole compliance and policy aspect that comes with it. And as General Counsel, in-house lawyers, you're already involved in things like Modern Slavery Act statements or other sustainability type statements that your local legislation will require, which may, for example, even be linked to environmental reporting that needs to already be taking place. So when you actually pull all of the things you do already together, there is actually quite a lot of involvement you've already got in that net zero space. And the UK Climate Change Committee reported back to Parliament last week and was really critical of the lack of progress in this space and called for more decisive action and more policy to be put in place in order to drive the net zero agenda. That should be linked to low carbon choices for customers and a funding strategy which supports this. So it's really clear that there's more to come in this space, and it's really important for in-house lawyers to be able to be ahead of the game and not just be reactive, but be able to advise on risks and opportunities as they're coming up. In my view, in-house lawyers are also ideally placed to initiate change and not just respond to what colleagues are asking from you. First of all, you know how your organisation works. You can speak to colleagues at the most senior level, and any organisation not currently thinking about net zero is going to be left behind. Staying on top of and ideally ahead of the game is really crucial to retaining customers, whether these are private customers, business customers, or in the public sector space. And you can play your part in your organisation by asking the relevant questions. I'm coming back a little bit to Paul's concept of being the first mate, which I really liked. I like that analogy, and that's going to be one of my takeaways from today already. But you can ask the relevant questions, such as every business should be looking at considering their own energy usage. Are you buying 100% renewable energy? Considering other forms of on-site generation or more carbon-friendly energy sources, such as solar or air source heat pumps. They can be especially effective if combined with some on-site storage. If you have a fleet, could the fleet go electric? You could consider sustainability audits, building management systems, which can also save on your energy usage. And linked to all of this, you can influence your supply chain. And by supply chain, I don't just mean your legal supply chain, so this is what you're asking from your external lawyers, but also your general supply chain that supports your business in achieving any type of sustainability or net zero targets that it wishes to achieve. So really to conclude, I think my top 3 reasons for wanting to be part of Lawyers for Net Zero and being really supportive of Lawyers for Net Zero. The first one is it's really easy to get overwhelmed by net zero, ESG, sustainability, you name it. There's so much terminology floating around. I probably get an email a day on something, a conference, a seminar, a webinar, any type of activity in this concept. And this group can really help with exchanging ideas and experiences, and just help you work out what areas to focus on and which areas to prioritize, because they're going to be different for everyone, because all our businesses are different. Again, Paul's words rang in my mind around there are no easy wins in this space. It is a transition, it is a journey, it is a longer term piece. So this group can really help in keeping your focus going. I think the second point is, when I first, and you could tell, I only really started my journey on this at the beginning of the year. And it's really easy to think that you've missed the boat. Everybody else is further ahead than you. And, oh, everybody's talking about this, I'm not, so I've completely lost out. And I think Lawyers for Net Zero can really help, you getting up to speed really quickly, but also help you work out, well, which are the areas that are, what are other people talking about, thinking about? What has worked for others, what hasn't worked so well for others, and what do I want to try out? And I think the third point is, which I already said at the beginning, is we're all really busy people. I think this group helps you to get that focus, get that prioritization, and not every idea or every concept is right for everyone or necessarily appropriate for your business. I hope I've given you my reasons for getting involved, and that you can take some of that that might be relevant for you. But really, in summary, this is why I bother, and this is why I'm really excited about Lawyers for Net Zero. I'm really excited that we've got to the launch event today, because we have been talking about this for some time, and it's great to get to this first step. And I'm really looking forward to the rest of the session. So thank you very much to everyone for joining, and back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Karen, for that. It was really wonderful hearing both the start of your journey and also some of the practical points in terms of small wins and big wins and the questions you've been asking. On that note, I'm going to pass over to Adam Woodfull. Adam, we've heard about Lawyers for Net Zero in teaser form so far in the comments from Paul and Kieran, and I'm delighted to be able to hand over to you to share more details about what you've been working on and how this fits in the wider context of the climate initiatives within law at the moment.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And achieving net zero is going to be the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced, and also the greatest opportunity for creativity and collaboration. So this event actually is a great example of that collaboration in practice, because it's working with Sarah and Esla and as part of the London Climate Action Week. So I'm delighted for that to be here. And I'm also, really privileged to have had Paul and Kieran give their time. Obviously, they didn't just turn up and give that speech off the cuff, however much it was very well presented. They did a lot of time working on that. So I'm just going to give you a little bit more about Lawyers for Net Zero to help contextualize what we're going to be going through in our panels, to help talk to the title of Delivering on Net Zero, the Role of the In-House Lawyer. Because our focus, if we were to summarize it in one sentence, is on how in-house lawyers can help their organization avoid greenwash and achieve a legitimate net zero. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing you need to do is, with anything like this, you need to convene a community of like-minded individuals who can support each other, share ideas. Then what we're offering is focus and guidance through our net zero action principles, which I'll just quickly detail those in their high level. They're champion net zero internally, deliver rapid practical action, learn and share key knowledge, influence suppliers, and then champion net zero externally, which Kieran particularly there has just done a fantastic job of, and the other 5 panelists which will be joining us will also be doing principle 5, championing net zero internally. So it's all well and good though to have a community, everybody sharing with each other and also to have the focus. But what we need is momentum. We need to keep this going. And so how we've been doing that is working directly with the champions, with the in-house council that Kieran's one, you'll be hearing from 5 others, in what we call action learning groups, which is a co-coaching process, a facilitated process where I currently have been facilitating it. 4 council come together regularly to share their successes and challenges and how they deal with that. We've had a first pilot with a program of 20 council across 5 different action learning groups. And we've actually got further 15 council teed up to start the second pilot process. And actually we'll be opening up after this event for further council to join this our second pilot of it. So the questions that we're going to be focusing on in both the panel 1 and panel 2 are actually related to the net zero action principles. So panel 1 is going to be looking at principle 1, championing net zero internally and how do you deliver rapid practical action. And then panel 2 will be looking at learning and share, how learn and share key information. So if I can welcome onto stage the panelists from panel 1, that would be Tamuna, Anthony and Alessandro. And then what I will do is just going to ask them a simple question and then allow them to introduce themselves, because the topic of this panel is how in-house lawyers are helping ensure legitimate net zero is delivered. So what we are looking for from those guys, and we'll start off with Tamuna, is if you can introduce yourself, your role and organisation, etc. And then why you're taking climate action as just a little bit of more introduction. But then particularly I'm interested in is what's your personal view of what legitimate net zero is? And then I'm going to be asking all 3 of you that same question. So we'll start off with you, Tamuna.
Thank you, Adam. Hi, everyone. I'm Tamuna Cheshvili. I'm a transactional lawyer in the investment banking division of Deutsche Bank. And I advise the business on structured products with a particular focus on emerging markets. So the legal function in an investment bank is clearly a control function, but in addition to identifying and managing legal and reputational risks, I very much see my role as being the enabler of the bank's vision and key priorities. And I think that is particularly true in relation to sustainability and Deutsche Bank's sustainability strategy. To give an example, one of the sustainability targets that Deutsche Bank has specifically committed to delivering is the provision of sustainable financing of at least 200 billion euros by the end of 2025. And I think I see delivery of that specific target, for example, as very much a key part of my role and responsibility as in-house lawyer at Deutsche. In terms of why I'm taking climate action, both in my personal and professional life, it is because, frankly, the epic and tragic scale of the climate and nature crisis. And I was just thinking, listening to Paul with his opening remarks, I was thinking about how, the financial systems are by now familiar with the so-called black swan events in the form of the 9/11 or the current pandemic we're going through. But the big question at the moment, I think, is what color is the next black swan going to be? And if not enough is done in the next 10 years about the climate change and the environmental degradation, I think it's quite possible that the next black swan could be a green swan with a devastating impact on the lives of everybody really on the planet, and including the global economic structures that we take for granted. And I think as part of that, your question about what is a legitimate net zero, and it's so important to emphasize, the ambitious part of net zero targets and delivery of the net zero goal. I think for me, legitimate net zero is about very much raising the bar. And again, in the context of financial systems, I would say that for for too long, financial systems did not actually price in the negative impact of economic activity in the form of CO2 emissions or deforestation or economic inequality. And I think now is the time to transform, that massive mammoth task of transforming this existing system to a new one, where actually sustainability is not a nice to have, and where risk is more accurately priced and financial activity is actually aligned with planetary boundaries and human rights.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. And so now I'd like to ask the same question of Anthony. So if you can join us on stage, and then it's basically yourself, why you're taking the action, and about what's your view of legitimate net zero.
So yeah, so Anthony Kenny, I'm a lawyer within the legal team of GlaxoSmithKline, GSK. So my role within GSK is kind of split into two. One is to support all the central corporate functions, and so I've got to, which includes our communications and government affairs team. So through that, I've come across obviously our communications around GSK's commitment to net zero and nature positive, and also our sponsorship of COP26. But also on the corporate side, I do deals as well. And actually, what springs to my mind, I think we're yet to see this really grow. But increasingly, I think corporates are going to have to look in the due diligence space in terms of what targets we're buying and what they're doing about. So that's another, I think, area as lawyers we're going to need to focus on. So that's my role. I mean, I think I've very much come to Lawyers for Net Zero in a personal capacity because, I've been supporting within GSK the ESG more through the lens of human rights and labor rights. I've always been interested in climate change, but I think thanks to meeting Adam, that's kind of really been sort of re-energized. But I'm approaching this in a personal capacity. But what's exciting me is about this initiative is that it inspires you listening to others and their journey to have conversations internally. And it's surprising how open parts of the business are to having legal support in this space. So I'm hoping in the next weeks and months, I'm going to be able to combine my personal interests with the interest of GSK to support this really important topic. And I have to say, before I move on to let's do that now. So the why. I have to say, why get involved in climate change? Just so much, existential threat. The scale of this, and actually, what's required to change it. It's going to change. We're going to need to change how we live. I mean, it's as simple as that. And how we operate as businesses is a huge challenge. And I think the power of an organization like Lawyers for Net Zero is that we're going to really need to collaborate and combine all that brain power to because what's like Tamuna and Kieran and others, I probably get bombarded with updates from law firms and different organizations, and why would we have 100 different law firms focusing on this? Why couldn't we combine that brain power into kind of and focus it? So this is why I think the Lawyers for Net Zero and it can do the same for the internal community. And the why, I think also just my children. I look at my 6-year-old and my 3-year-old and think, what kind of future are we creating for them? And what's really inspired me in the past 12 months is my daughter coming home after having learned things at school and saying, what are we doing around recycling? That should go in that bin, and going into the woods and really caring about waste and rubbish on the floor. And to see that, and also just even as simple things like I bought a new iPhone last year, and talking to the sales assistant at Apple, she said she was having sleepless nights because she was worried about the climate issue. And you have a conversation like that, and it really just brings home to you that for the younger generation in particular, they really are quite scared about what's happening. So I think all of those things, I think it's a super important topic. And Adam, kudos to you for setting up this group, and I think kudos to you for also. And one of the benefits, the benefits of being part of this come every day. And I think one just today, hearing Paul speak, being in the same panel as someone like Paul is just awe-inspiring. Paul, wow, what a presentation. The fact that we can share this stage with you is just amazing. Legitimate net zero, I think that's really, we've touched on a lot of this already today. It's really about making sure that the organizations we support, and indeed how we support each other through this organization, it's all about authenticity. It's all about understanding the scale of the challenge. It's not about speaking good things and producing good brochures. It's about action and walking the talk. It's about understanding that what we're going to need to do is going to be very disruptive changes and owning that and being accountable for that. And I think what's already happening, which is nice to see through government bodies and the NGO community, is a move from talking to actual measuring. I think that's going to be really important to track how we move forward, and some of it will be baby steps. But I think in conclusion, I say, Adam, one of the great things about this group is that it's a community, a building community that's going to increasingly share. We're all in different stages of the community, and some of us will be able to go in, have roles within our organizations to make changes, some of us will not. But we can all contribute to the group, we can all contribute ideas, and I think that's going to be so important, you know, combined collective thinking to solve this really big challenge.
Fantastic. Thank you for that impassioned share, Anthony. And if I can now invite Alessandro to join us on stage and talk about briefly, you know, introduce yourself, what your why you're taking the action, and then also what you are seeing as being legitimate net zero.
Okay, thank you, Adam. And thank you for changing the order, because I was going to do anyway. I am the Deputy General Counsel at Colt. We are a high bandwidth connectivity provider and data center provider, operating pretty much everywhere in Europe, in Far East Asia, and we have a small presence in the US, focusing on the B2B market. What brings me personally is a similar set of beliefs that Anthony has. I would like to focus a little bit more on our institutional role as lawyers, and I'd like to pick up a couple of points that I agree violently with. First is something that Kieran mentioned about the fact that we speak to everyone at the highest level, and you know, we've got almost 90 participants. I suspect that some of them feel, okay, I'm not a GC, I'm not deputy GC, why would people listen to me? And I'd like to answer that question preemptively, so to speak. Lawyers have a unique position in that they have more touch points into the organization than I think any other function, because other functions are very siloed. Sales have their sales target, marketing have their marketing initiatives, procurement have their cost reduction. We see all of this. So we are uniquely, I think, positioned to introduce the urgency of action for net zero in every conversation we have, which brings me neatly to the first principle of champion net zero internally. We can do that, and we can do that because we can have a discussion in the supply chain reshaping that, for instance, post-pandemic, a lot of your organization surely are considering. So if you're thinking of nearshoring, reshoring, changing, adding resilience, then emissions of your supply chain can be a part of that discussion, need to be part of that discussion, if you want that supply chain to be future-proof and resilient. Contracts. You may have a very large organization as customers. Colt does work with some of the largest tech companies on the planet. So maybe your angle is that you need to follow your customers. It's not a secret that Microsoft and Amazon and Google have ambitious targets. If we're part of their supply chain, we need to follow in their footsteps and deliver, contractually deliver, because they're not shrinking violets when it comes to contracts. So each element of what we do touches into net zero, but also is an opportunity for you in the attendees of this world to think, what is the best angle of my organization? And it could be, for instance, that in your organization is risk. So if lawyers in your organization are seen as risk managers and they see everything through the prism of avoiding risk, fine, use that angle and then say, we've underestimated historically how risky climate change is on our supply chain, on the viability of our customers, on the viability of some of our operations, and look at that, because that maybe lands in your organization better than a customer angle, because maybe your customers are not terribly concerned, or you don't think they're concerned. So I think my ask to you is think what really would work in your organization and see what can work. Because if you were the GC and if the CEO called you tomorrow, summoned you to her office and said it is now her first priority to get to net zero, you would find a way. You would ask people, you would ask your peers, you would ask your law firms, you would look at everything you do through the prism of net zero. So that's what I think we're all trying to do. Different stages of maturity, baby step for some people are more mature. It's absolutely fine. But this conversation I started is, I think, extremely important, which brings me to your second question, Adam, which is, what is a legitimate net zero target? And then I go back to Paul's mention, which has also been picked up by Tamun, I think, about authenticity. And it's the fact that I am quite lucky and comfortable that this interest and belief of mine aligns perfectly with called values and with called aggressive strategy for carbon reduction and environmental sustainability in general. But I think there is a general trend overall that organization for profit especially needs to demonstrate that they are transparently and authentically doing what they say they would be doing. And lawyers tend to be stewards. There's an element of stewardship. I mean, your GC possibly is the secretary to the board. In some cases, unofficially, he's the guardian of the ethics of the company. Sometimes he or she is the chief ethical officer. So I think when there is an element of reputational risk, of is the company really fulfilling its purpose, its mission, people do look at the general counsel and at the general counsel function. And I think is there that we can then apply the same level of scrutiny and say, no, this is greenwashing. And it's exactly as when we tick the box about Modern Slavery Act, but we haven't really looked into our supply chain. So if you are doing this properly, then legitimate net zero is just being open and transparent and honest about the fact that you are trying to live those values and you're exposing what you're doing, even if it's for some people not good enough and might draw criticism, but it shows progress and it shows transparency.
Fantastic. That's great. I think between the three of you, you've got some really rich understanding there for what is legitimate net zero. And also, Anthony and Alessandro, you kind of picked in some things actually which were from the second question. So depending on how time's going, we might just finish off with Tamuna answering the last question, which is, what have you been doing to champion net zero internally? And both Anthony and Alessandra did answer some of that. So I think what we'll do is we'll finish off with Tamuna. So you're bookending this, giving what your journey has been in Deutsche Bank around this. So if we can bring Tamuna back on stage, please.
Hi. So I mean, I echo a lot of what I've heard already from Alessandra and Anthony about this, but I think in terms of Deutsche Bank specific activity, I would say that I would focus on two aspects. One is supporting net zero as a member of business facing legal function, and secondly, within the legal department itself. On the first point in relation to business-facing activity, we've already heard from Alessandro the greenwashing pitfalls that by now we are kind of familiar with. So for me, my contribution is very much about formulating internal controls and operating processes in relation to sustainability-linked financial products and transactions, with a view of avoiding those greenwashing pitfalls and actually prioritizing substance over form. I also work on sustainable finance structures and transactions. And in that context, in the transactional context, where the use of proceeds of a particular financial product is for green purposes, or the clients have taken on ESG performance targets as part of a financial contract. I think lawyers, in-house lawyers, can do a lot in examining, scrutinizing the substance of what is being achieved, and is it ambitious enough, is it specific enough, is it measurable, is there some room for improvement, are we actually moving the dial here? So I see that as being, this kind of, when I say business-facing side of things, that I see that as a key issue. Within the legal department itself, I've been greatly assisted by the pilot scheme sessions that we've had at Lawyers for Net Zero, and some of the ideas that have been generated by the participants have helped me to raise climate change as a kind of a regular theme at our team meetings. I think I want to emphasize that this is very much a dynamic journey. We're very much at the start of the journey in many ways, because lawyers and non-lawyers are at different stages of kind of embracing ESG and kind of understanding the scope of it. So talking about climate change, sustainability, ESG, what does this mean at team meetings? Also speaking to senior colleagues, to the wider legal department in terms of not only sort of purely legal and technical and regulatory side of ESG. There's, mountains of regulation and policy on ESG, and of course lawyers inevitably end up being involved on the technical side and interpreting the regulation, advising the business, and so on. But I want to emphasize very much that while that skill is very valuable, what is actually really important is stressing that all in-house counsel have a role to play in highlighting the importance and the profile of environmental concerns to their business, and making sure that the business integrates those ESG concerns into their decision making. So you don't have to be an ESG expert, you don't have to know the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan inside out to be able to make a difference. I think what you need is a fire in the belly and a determination to actually have a sense of purpose and a determination to make a positive impact and positive social change.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tamuna. So I'm going to thank panel one and invite you to elegantly depart from the stage. And I would like panel two to join us on the stage. That will be Stephanie and Daniel. And what they're going to be focusing on is the title of this panel is Learning About Net Zero, Where to Start. This is particularly because as has been actually observed by a number of the other panelists and speakers, we're all on a journey with this. So what we recognize, that's why kind of the learning and sharing is the kind of central part of our principles. And we've invited Stephanie, who actually joined the fifth action learning group that we created. So she joined actually a little bit after the first four were created. So she's very new to this, but she's stepped up for it. And then also Daniel, who's actually been doing some work around this for quite some time, but I'll let him give more about that. So we're going to start off with Daniel, and if you can just describe what your role is, a little bit about why you're taking climate action, and then share what your journey has been.
Thank you, Adam. So I'm Daniel Grimwood. I'm a lawyer in Arup's legal team in the UK IMEA region, and I am currently leading on climate change legal risks within our team. So it has become a sort of recognised part of what we do and the service we provide as a legal team. I'm taking climate action because it's extremely important to me, and I want to have a livable planet for me and my daughter and all of us in the years to come. And the trajectory we're on at the moment is not the right one. So a simple reason for taking action, I suppose. In terms of my journey, so it's always been an important thing for me. I've kind of dabbled throughout my career with being a member of the UKLA, attending kind of environmental legal events, and just generally reading about this in my spare time outside of my role. And then I moved jobs a couple of years ago, nearly 3 years ago now, to Arup, and Arup was a company that was aligned with my interest and shared my values. And Arup puts sustainable development at the heart of its values and of its company strategy. And it has a climate services plan as well. So climate change and sustainable development is kind of central to Arup's thinking. So I joined the company, and I always had in mind that this would be something I would try to get involved with and try to shape my role in that direction. And I found that the legal team, every in-house legal team deals with so many issues on a daily basis, and things can get lost in all of the noise. And I found that nobody was really looking at climate change as a legal risk and raising it within Arup. There are plenty of people within the company who were thinking about climate change, about decarbonisation and net zero and resilience, but there wasn't anybody kind of being the voice on the legal side. So I kind of took it upon myself with the knowledge I already had, and started attending events just to build my knowledge. And I attended one law firm event. It was a Clyde & Co event on resilience, which really struck a chord and got me thinking. A lot of the things that they were talking about were directly relevant to Arup and could pose a real kind of business risk that people should know about. And lots of us on the panel have been talking about how in-house legal teams are guardians of the business, and it's part of our role to kind of raise risks that we think the business should be thinking about. So I went back to the office after attending this event and just jotted down on one side of A4 a note, at first to my GC, setting out what I thought the climate change legal risks, including decarbonisation, were to Arup. And I was asked to then take that and present it to the board. And they were very interested, but at that time, this was a couple of years ago, there were things that were taken away from it, but it wasn't kind of an urgent thing for Arup to deal with. It was something that we were already dealing with, and there wasn't anything that came of it immediately. So I spent the next year and a half sharing what I thought were the legal issues with the business and with the various project teams around Arup who work on projects for our clients, and also with the people involved in corporate governance and our supply chains and things like that. And gradually it's gained traction, and in the last 6 months or so it's really gained traction, and now the legal team has been asked to write some guidance for the firm globally about climate change legal risks, both decarbonisation and climate resilience, and to make that a global thing and then share that. So I think my journey has come from a place of learning about it myself in my own time to making it part of my role, and now very much a part of my role because we actually have a deliverable for the business on climate change legal risk.
That's a fantastic journey, and I remember the first time I heard it, just like inspired that you got yourself and gone for it, and that's in a sense what Lawyers for Net Zero is looking to do, is give people the guidance, the permission to do that. So in the spirit of that, I'd like to hand over to Stephanie to kind of highlight herself and her journey as to what's brought her to be speaking to you now.
Thanks, Adam. Afternoon, everybody. My name's Stephanie Beat. I'm Head of Legal and Compliance at Certas Energy. Certas Energy is part of the Retail and Oil division of DCC PLC, and I've literally just been with the business for 12 months now. So I think I've been brought today to speak to you, which I'm really honoured to do so, to just really probably show what you can achieve in quite a small amount of time, because as Adam said, probably, I think maybe even less than 8 weeks ago, I'd never heard of Lawyers for Net Zero. And clearly, within our business, we're going to be on a very interesting journey. DCC have sort of set out quite clearly their goals and objectives, and as a company in that group, we've got an expectation and certainly a drive and a desire to move towards that. So I was conscious internally that I'd need to get up to speed quite quickly on this area. I definitely saw it as something that, I didn't want to be waiting for people to come and ask me about. I wanted to be more proactive. And I think a few people have said today, it's such a huge topic. It's easy to feel quite overwhelmed with it, particularly with everything else that you've got going on in your day job. So I actually attended a GC summit that the lawyer was running, and it was actually Kirin that inspired me on this one, as I'm sure she has many people on the call today. And that's when I reached out to Adam to find out a bit more about the organisation. And I have to say, as I say, a few weeks in now, I've attended obviously the working learning action groups. And it's just having that time in your busy schedule where you do have to break out and join these groups, speak with other people who are like-minded on various points of their journey. I'm probably one of the newest to it, but I've already taken away a huge amount. And I think taking such a huge topic and chunking it up into more actionable steps that you can take on a weekly basis and just build into your own job, it's just really rewarding. I think any lawyer, any head of legal is always clamoring to be involved in more strategic discussions and decision making within a business. And this really, particularly if your organisation's fairly early on in its journey, it's one of the key points that you can do in this area. I think quite a few people have said things today that I can really just endorse. Within the legal department, you do speak to a lot of people across your organisation. And I was conscious that there were a lot of people working on sustainability related projects, but they just weren't talking to each other. They were in silos. So already, and I've sort of reported this back through the Action Learning Group last week, some of the working groups have already amalgamated, saying, we didn't know you were doing this, and Steph sort of told us to speak to you. And actually already had sort of thanks internally for getting involved, which I think as a lawyer is great that people actually want you to be involved. So I think for me, being part of this organisation and just speaking with like-minded people has just really given me that sort of acceleration, I suppose, to sort of at least try and do some things internally, even if they only feel like baby steps at the moment. I really do feel like this is going to move on quite quickly, and it's sort of giving me the tools to be able to make a sort of value contribution.
Wonderful, thank you for that. Now, we are coming towards the end, but after this second panel, we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions of Paul and Kirin, our keynotes at the start. So please do add questions to the chat function, and I'll be able to ask those. So we'll actually go back to you, Stephanie. You've talked about why the process has been valuable, which is great, but what's been the benefits to either you personally or even you're maybe starting to see to the business about how the process that you've been undertaking for the last couple of months?
I think the biggest thing I've seen is literally that conversation that's been taking place internally. So as I said, one of the key reasons that I wanted to find out more was because I could already feel a lot of momentum and a lot of people getting very busy on things. And obviously, as people have pointed out, the key role when a GC or a head of legal alarm goes off is just thinking, we don't want to rush at this. It's got to be genuine. It's got to be legitimate. The last thing you want is to cause a reputational catastrophe because you've launched into something and you're falling into that greenwashing trap. So as I say, the same person that sort of thanked me for sort of getting involved with their working party is now even starting to talk like me. And the other day I didn't even have to say anything, and before she'd already started the meeting off by talking about, we need to be leading by example. We need to be avoiding greenwashing. So clearly things can have quite a big impact. And, I don't mean this to sound big-headed in any way, but I think as lawyers, sometimes we don't appreciate how much impact we have and how much people listen to the things that we're saying. So I think there's a great opportunity. I mean, the Lawyers for Net Zero group is brilliant because it gives you that ability to sort of home into lots of other areas and lots of other experts in their field and find out what they're doing. Also give you ideas as well that you can take back to your organisation to help them to try and embed it more in what they're doing. So I'm already starting to see the benefits, literally, like I say, probably 8 weeks in.
So thank you. And then as the panelists go, Daniel, obviously you've been doing this for a little longer. So, and you know, we're not going to claim all of this is due to Lawyers for Net Zero, clearly, because you started off yourself. So for you over the last 2 years, what have you been seeing as the additional benefits to what you've already shared?
Yeah, the one of the main ones is that it this is a board level issue for I think all companies, or if it isn't yet, it should be, and I think people would agree based on what we've had today so far. So bringing this up has got me in front of the most senior people in the organization, and it has, you know, I'm sure I'm talking here in the audience to some people who aren't GCs, and you know, as a way for kind of progressing through your career, this is a good thing to kind of pick up and run with. It's a current risk issue, and it's currently underrepresented, I think, at board level, and it certainly was in Arup, and Arup was fairly advanced with its thinking on decarbonisation. So that's one thing. Talking about this has made it become a recognised part of my role, and as I said, you know, this is something that I always wanted to be part of my professional career. It was always something that I cared about, and so now, you know, my job aligns more with my values. So it's been great from that perspective as well. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for lawyers to kind of have an impact in their organisations, because net zero and the kind of regulatory landscape around net zero is only going to grow. There's a gap between the rhetoric on net zero and the number of laws and regulations that are actually affecting companies like Arup at the moment, and that will be true for many companies, and in-house counsel in many companies are probably aware that there might be laws coming down the line that are going to affect them. So if you're setting yourself up to be the person that's the go-to person on that, I think that's a good place to be. Lawyers for Net Zero has been so helpful for me in terms of a kind of touch point with other lawyers to say, you know, this is what we're doing, this isn't working, we've got a bit of a blocker here, how would you get around it? And getting some other people from other organizations giving you advice on this, and carving out time in their day to give you some help, because it's help that you possibly could seek from people within your organization, but it's the like-minded individuals, and everybody's approaching this challenge from different ways. So it's been great to get the thoughts of lots of people as we all kind of learn and share.
Fantastic. Well, that's a wrap for the panels, but not a wrap for this session yet, because we still fortunately have Kieran and Paul, our keynotes from the start of the session. So if Daniel and Stephanie can glide off the stage, and I would like to invite back onto the stage Kieran and Paul. So if I can get you back up, wonderful. And so what I'll do actually is I'll start off by asking a question that actually came up for me, chair's sort of privilege here. And it was, I think this question is to both of you, but it was prompted by something Paul said, which was around authenticity. Just tell me a little bit more about where you see authenticity laying in this conversation. And who would like to go first on that out of the two of you? Or I'll choose Paul.
Okay. I would say for me, the authenticity piece has, and I'll try and be really quick and succinct. I know we've got limited time, and I'm sure Kieran has got a view. If we look at ESG was originally GES, and we flipped the acronym in the UN in 2004, right? Normally, you'd lead it with governance. And the reason we flipped it was because GES sounds technical and not very sexy. It was purely tabloid, and it was purely a conversation one afternoon. Environment wedged up front, begin to get metrics. G at the end, business understands the importance of government. S is the difficult one, sticking it in the middle, it won't be flicked off. So look, that's an ESG anecdotal story. But to answer the question, the authenticity piece is because I think governance has become under such a forensic lens in terms of governance for some companies is box ticking and filling in forms, and it's not in the culture. And it's become, I think there needs to be a transition to governance, to authenticity back to governance, where boards really take control of companies and they're well led and well advised by the legal compartment. So I'll leave it there, but the authenticity piece is because I think there is so much mistrust of disclosure, transparency, and accountability, which have become very cheap words. And I think that extends to the point I made about the failure of trust across society, young and old, of institutions in government or business, right? The GC that can help its company project authenticity in terms of what we do, how we govern ourselves is serious. And I know there are many companies who do it, but I think as a currency, it's become cheapened. And I think it needs to be rebooted. And I think GCs, Kieran, are the first mates. If you lose control of the ship, the skipper might be in his berth having a whiskey, but the GCs control the ship. And I think that's my point. I'll leave it at that without tiring that metaphor too much.
Wonderful. So, Kieran.
I think Paul mentioned one point that I was going to mention about the box ticking exercise, because especially when you mention governance, people very easily then float into that, oh, I have to do it, and that's why I just have to find the right things to tick all the boxes. And I think, and that especially in any environmental or climate context, is the tail wagging the dog. And I think as in-house counsel, you've got an important role to play to make sure it's not the governance that is, so to speak, the tail. And unfortunately, it is the last letter, which was great to hear your explanation, Paul, why it is the last letter. But you don't want the governance to be dictating what people decide to do in the context of E and S in the ESG context, because that is the tail wagging the dog, and you're just doing it to get the numbers right, for want of a better word. And that's where the authenticity comes in. I think you need to believe in the first two elements, the E and the S, and then the G will come naturally. But obviously the G, from an in-house legal perspective, is absolutely crucial to get right and make sure it is right. But you can't have the one dictating the other, even though government will use the latter in order to get you to do the E and S. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be perceived as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Great response there. So I've had a couple of actually related questions come in from the audience. The first question was regarding what's people's perspective on the upcoming COP? And I think Paul might be able to answer this well. And will it be more consequential than many of the others? Obviously, COP21 was a bit of a high point, but a lot of the other COPs have not necessarily delivered to the level we need. And then actually, a related question to that is that, given that they've maybe been a bit stop-start, can the private sector leapfrog the public sector? So I'll go to Paul again first on this, and then see what Kieran can add to that.
Look, COPs are much more Harry Potter than they are Albert Einstein, right? It's about political momentum, and it's about, in some ways, that almost intangible geopolitical atmosphere. And the reason I'm optimistic about COP26 is not because of Boris's slow start or his minefield in Cumbria or any of those things. The stars are aligned where you have a G7 government with the machinery to work with other governments to get a result. Now, as I said, I think briefly in my talk, the French were immaculate. They saw the failure in Denmark of COP9. They said, we're not going to fail. And they put 2 years of diplomatic outreach to work with the G77, the developing countries, the emerging countries, so that when they came to give together a result. I think the dynamics for COP26 are different. I think we've had the Trump period of fractious geopolitics, and we've still got issues. But the G7 meeting we've just had in Devon, it looked as though the grown-ups were in control again, right? So I'm being very simplistic. You take that atmosphere into COP26. It's about relations. It's about the need for success. So it's never done till it's done. They'll negotiate until the last minute, the last hour. But I think the momentum in terms of public perception, finance and investment, the lawyers on climate change, and government's collective need at G7, G20 and beyond for a win, give it a chance. The preparation has been poor and limited because of COVID. But I think, and if you get a success at COP26, all that is momentum for the next few years, and it takes it on. And I think finally, the parts of the general public, whether I'm in the Sahel or in East Africa or in Brazil, or people are now deeply concerned that climate change is real, it is impacting them. And we've heard your panelists speak about their children, whether 3 or 6 or teenagers. So, sorry, Kieran, I'll stop there. But, fingers crossed, I think Glasgow could be a win.
So with this, actually, I will go to the sort of second part of the question, Kieran, and I won't make it too politically loaded for you, but also I'll slightly reframe it. How do you think the private sector holistically, or maybe even specifically down to organizational level, can take leadership and so that we're not just relying on the public sector and governments and politicians?
Yeah, I think, Adam, to answer your question about COP26, there is a piece around, the one is politics, the other one is doing the right thing. And Paul put it much better. Harry Potter couldn't have thought of a better description for it. But I think that the important thing is for private organizations to think about, well, what is it that is important for us as an organization, but also fits into what we stand for as a business. So around your values, around what you want to be seen as by the outside world, be it your customers, your other stakeholders, and then do what is the right thing to do. I think the challenge with politics, and COP26 in my mind is part of politics, is if you wait for that to be the driver, then that is going to be too late. I mean, the Climate Change Committee's already said it's lagging behind. There needs to be much more drastic action, and it's just not coming fast enough. So yes, as an organisation, you can do lobbying, you can do, the positive stuff for government to actually put those measures in, and that is something we do as an organisation because it fits into our values and what we want to do from an energy transition perspective. But that's not necessarily going to be the right thing for every organisation. So I think every business needs to work out what is right for them, what do they want to stand for, and then implement that. If that then ticks the whatever criteria there are, the G in ESG, then that's great. And we're coming back to almost my answer to the first question. But that should not be, you shouldn't wait for politics to catch up before doing something on this, because that is likely to be too late.
But yeah, now what we're going to have, actually, I think, Paul, you might have a follow-up to that, and actually that will make that the last point, because we need to start. We need a 5-minute or so wrap-up period. So if I can hand over you to have the last formal word from us.
Look, I couldn't have agreed with Kieran more. And just a footnote on that. So from the late 90s until Paris, in many ways, the private sector in the COP context was on the back foot. They were going along. There was a lot of energy. There was a lot of effort. There was some negative lobbying. There's positive stuff. But it was like they were watching the circus. And what we learned during that period, and I've both been a UN official and private business, was you actually had a lot of UN officials, diplomats, bureaucrats arguing around 15% of the finance that would be needed to affect climate change. They were all focused on public expenditure, public budgets, and all of that. And there was 15 years lost. What's my point? The only way you really have an impact in climate is moving trillions of dollars. Governments in a fiscally constrained environment will never do that. You have to get the private sector, the capital markets, and all those different facets of the investment chain on side, incentivized, and central to the discussions. It took us about 15 years hard wiring to factor finance, asset owners, insurers, reinsurers into the climate discussions. And I think there is a new momentum there. The one big thing is, and I will stop here, is that, you know, post-COVID, governments know that, you know, they're really fiscally constrained. We have a massive problem in climate. You have to get public and private aligned through the investment chain, through markets, incentivized. And that's why they need a good framework. That's why they need a proper carbon price, and then let the market do what the market does well. And I'll stop there.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a great ending kind of rallying call. And I want to end with, for the section that we've been doing here in my moderating, with our own rallying call, which is about how everybody that is in the audience can help on that journey to avoid greenwashing and achieve legitimate net zero. If you're not a lawyer, think about how you can apply some of what you've been hearing to your profession or your business. And if you're not an in-house lawyer, if you know any in-house lawyers, you could let them know about Lawyers for Net Zero via obviously our website, our LinkedIn group, etc. And then if you are an in-house lawyer, two things obviously you can do. You can join Lawyers for Net Zero, and if you want to know more, get in touch with me, adam.woodall@lawyersfornetzero.com. And then, of course, you can get, as an in-house lawyer, you could get busy with Principle 5, just as all the panelists and Kieran have done, which is to champion net zero externally. So post about it on LinkedIn, communicate with people. So I just want to, after that little rallying call, want to finish on that high note by thanking you, the audience, for giving us your attention, the keynotes and the panelists, and particularly actually Sarah, because she has worked so hard to make this a very smooth, very professional event. And I'm very, very grateful for her support, both from the organizational side and also just as a great human being. So thank you, Sarah, and I'll hand over you to close.
Thank you, Adam. I want to say a huge thank you to our panelists and to our keynote speakers, and to you, Adam, for today, and to everyone here for joining us. And just a couple of final words from me before we close. As Paul said earlier in his keynote, we're moving into an era of convergence of systemic risks. And I loved the metaphor, Paul, the storm not just being climate change, but the functioning and questioning of corporate behaviour. I would add to that if it's the role of the GC to embed into the DNA of their organisation this questioning, the role of lawyers as a whole is, I suggest, to embed this within legal systems and practice. And that's really what Acela is about. In tackling the systemic challenges, there's a lot to think about. And as you might know from previous Acela events, these are very much interconnected conversations, and we could have taken this in a number of directions. We've not, for example, today dug into the role of net zero in impact investment, or looked at how purpose-led businesses are engaging with this, or talked about how B Corp certification can accelerate meeting robust science-based targets in your net zero transition. But for more information about these topics, and to stay tuned to what's coming out from Acela as we share more content with you over the coming months to support the journey we're all on, we invite you to stay tuned in to the Acela mailings and to explore what it means to be part of the Acela community by following the link that I'll just drop in the chat. So on that note from me, I just want to say thank you to everyone, and let everyone go, I think, a minute early. Wonderful to have you all here with us. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.